You're trying to give the young people something that will help them, yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Welcome to the TeachThought podcast. My name is Drew Perkins. I'm the Director of TeachThought Professional Development, and we're glad you tuned in. I'd like to remind you of the value of leaving reviews on places like iTunes or wherever you're listening, as well as the value of sharing us with your various networks. It's a real pleasure for me to host most of the TeachThought podcast episodes and get to bring you thoughtful and interesting guests. And as our audience grows, so does the quality and the quantity of guests that are available to us. So we do encourage you and would appreciate any of those reviews, shares, and things like that to help us grow our audience. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me via email at drew@teachthought.com. If you have stumbled upon us but are not familiar with our work in other areas, just a few notes that we do directly work with schools, leaders, and teachers to help them grow to better prepare learners for what we call the modern world by building upon the ethos of TeachThought.com. So I invite you to visit our professional development website, wegrowteachers.com, where you'll find information on the variety of workshops, consulting services, and events that we offer to help you grow in areas like project-based learning and inquiry, differentiated instruction, assessment, literacy, growth mindset, leadership, and much more. So I invite you again to contact us today to explore how we can help design and deliver professional learning that provokes profound thinking driven by your beautiful questions. In today's podcast, I spoke with Charlotte Cheng, who is the Curriculum Product Manager at Wonder Workshop, and they've got several products, one of which is a pretty cool little robot that my daughters had fun and are having fun playing with called Q. We talked about the importance of computer science and the thinking behind that for future and modern world sort of needs, as well as the pursuit of designing things that will sustain interest as far as tech tools and toys and things like this, as well as tying tech integration to other content, the way that they do that with their curriculum. Kind of branched into what EdTech companies get wrong and how you know when EdTech is working, and had, I think, a really good discussion around the importance of feedback and mistakes and failure and some of the things that they do internally at Wonder Workshop to facilitate for that kind of feedback, as well as the design for what they call low floor and high ceiling types of tech tools, and ended our conversation talking about their curriculum, the Q curriculum that goes with the robot. So interesting conversation. I hope you find it helpful and enjoyable as much as I did. All right, well, I'm here today with Charlotte Cheng, who is the Curriculum Product Manager at Wonder Workshop. And Charlotte, I'm happy to have you on. We're going to talk about technology integration and some of the projects that you've been working on, including the Q and the curriculum that goes with it, the robots. And the robots were big hits with my daughter's 9/11 when they unveiled it and thought, well, this is just maybe one of the coolest things ever. So they were programming it and moving it around and telling me what they could do and all that kind of stuff. But I want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners some of your background and what you think might be relevant to them.
Sure, sounds good. Pleasure to be on your podcast. I'm a huge fan of podcasts myself. My background is I graduated from Stanford University, first with a bachelor's in cognitive science. Basically, cognitive science is an interdisciplinary major that assesses the intersection between psychology, computer science, philosophy, and linguistics. And from that major, I realized I was very fascinated with the process of learning, and therefore went in again to get a master's in elementary education. From there, I've taught classes and workshops throughout the Bay Area. That's where I am, San Francisco Bay Area. For kindergarten all the way through 8th grade before diving into curriculum design for companies like Leapfrog, Disney, and various EdTech startups. And now I've been working at Wonder Workshop for 2 years, where I help design curriculum and create curriculum product for our robots that teach kids how to code and more.
Okay, and that's the Q robot, which is geared more towards middle school, and you've got some other robots and several other things that folks should check out. I believe the website is makewonder.com, but tell us a little bit about the Q robot so we can use that to get into some of the discussion around tech integration.
Yeah, sure. So basically, our first robot was Dash. Funnily enough, we got funded through Kickstarter first, and it's been around for 4 years. And what we saw were kids were slowly leveling up with Dash. We created a lot of content for Dash, and kids started as early as age 6, and we're still playing with the same robot when they were in 5th grade because we had a variety of apps that allowed them to slowly level up their coding skills. But what we noticed was, it's been in the market for 4 years. And the kids who were getting older needed something more. And so we wanted to create a robot that basically felt like an older sibling to Dash named Q. We like to call them our robot family. And so Q basically is a level up across the board from Dash. It basically has a more grown-up personality that it basically is more appealing to middle schoolers. We did a lot of testing with that. And it basically gives students more voice and choice as well. So they feel like they're taking ownership of their learning more with the Q app instead of being just guided through handheld through content instead.
So that means then that with that increased autonomy and voice, that the students and the learners, because it's not necessarily in a classroom, but there's a curriculum that goes with it. That means that there's an increased challenge because they, as I would guess, in comparison to Dash, that there are some decisions and some thinking that's maybe a bit more sophisticated. How did you approach that? Because sometimes, certainly I'm guessing that the emphasis on user interface is, and being able to have some intuitive pieces are there, but finding that sort of line of productive struggle where it's a challenge to figure out, but it's not too hard, where they either shut down or just say, yeah, I'm not going to play with this anymore.
No, I totally agree. And it was a learning process for us too. This is a new group of students that we've worked with. We're so used to the kindergarten through 5th grade age range that we really had to go into the classrooms and into the homes to see what works for this age range, basically. And what we realize is they still need that support and scaffolding as always, right? I still need support and scaffolding when I learned. And so we still had to create challenges we basically have 2 programming paradigms within one app. I don't know which ones your daughters enjoyed using more, but we have the block-based coding that is very familiar to many people using Scratch or code.org that slowly introduces JavaScript to the learners. And on the other side, we have something called Create or Wonder, which basically is state machine-based programming, where kids actually program their robot using decision trees or flowcharts. So we basically wanted to allow them to give them a choice of how they want to control the robot. And after they make that choice, we supply a lot of content to support them in that journey. So we provide challenges, we provide example programs, and that's something we really worked hard on this year, is releasing more and more content as we're learning more and more about this market. So we basically have 30 plus new challenges this year alone, and 40 plus new example programs as well, because we realize, like you said, voice and choice is very important, but you still need to provide that support so they can be successful regardless of what choice they made.
Yeah, so with the introduction of technology into the classroom and in teachers' lives, first of all, why is coding and the challenges that you all have designed, why do you feel like those are perhaps more important, assuming that you think they're more important, or at least they are important. Why the focus on those? Why should teachers or schools say this is something that's worth doing? Because tech integration is, I think, one of the big challenges is the entrance into it with the cost and the materials and the learning curve and all those things. And this is not something that, it's not a calculator.
Right. Yeah. I would say, I've interviewed teachers across the nation, very much like you're interviewing me now, and also through conferences across the nation as well. And what we realized is, computer science is sort of here to stay for students. It's really a new literacy. It's going to be a very important skill for them, regardless of what career they go into. So we realized that's going to be fundamental for kids, regardless of what interests they have. And on top of that, the robot, I remember having a TI-82 in algebra, right? And even though we were graphing, we sneakily basically started programming games into the TI-82 just to make learning more fun. And the robot basically has that personality, fun, motivation baked in to its functionality and into the app itself as well. But we say it brings STEAM into life because, instead of just programming on a screen, you're programming a robot that then comes to life. So if you feel like you're controlling this robot, just like you said, your daughter liked to show off what they were able to do with the robot. Basically, this robot becomes a point of pride for a kid to say, hey, look what I can do using coding. Look what I can do using programming. And like I said, my background is in interdisciplinary coursework. So we really strive hard to make our content also connect to other cross-curricular subject areas. So our first unit with Q is actually, the theme is creative writing. So we push the learners and the teachers to explore, how can I practice creative writing with my robot while programming it as well? So they are tasked with doing a long-term project where they either make a music video with the robot, they can teach a topic with the robot, or they can produce a show with the robot. So like I said, it doesn't have to be just siloed off into this robot is just for coding. We want this robot to basically be a tool of expression and a demonstration of what kids have learned in the classroom already.
So tell me more about that, because I don't recall thinking about a tech tool like this that connects explicitly with something like creative writing. I mean, it is, as you noted, like I said, my daughters thought it was really fun. It was cool. They were programming it. They were doing some of those things, but thinking about using it in a classroom to connect to other things, not just tech, that's an interesting way to think about it. What does that look like, that creative writing kind of piece, if you have more details?
Yeah, sure. So one of the capabilities that we're very proud of and we work very hard on is that students can actually, I keep saying students because I work in the schools, but learners can actually record their voices with the robot. So they can record songs that they've written, they can record things they want the robot to say, and it's basically stored on the robot and they can play back those audio files. So think about the different ways that, if you're telling your students or your learners to create a book report, and instead of having them write a 5-paragraph essay, they need to program the robot to express what they have learned from that book instead. So now you're basically, and this is my deepest passion for all of the companies I've worked with, is how can you get media and technology to make learning exciting and add that extra motivation for learners to say, hey, this is the why behind why I'm learning this. I'm learning this so I can express myself in this really cool way using this robot. I'm learning this because this is going to let me tell the story in the way I want to tell that story. And not every kid is very good at just writing alone, right? Like we said, there's multiple types of intelligences out there. So having that robot allows kids who are more comfortable with the physical aspect of expressing themselves to use the robot to demonstrate what they've learned versus just using their voice or just using their words.
Well, it's interesting. And before we went live, we were talking about project-based learning, and you're kind of touching on at least the fringes, if not more, there. One of the things that we really try to work with schools on in project-based learning is a really strong driving question, which has clarity, not necessarily explicitly, but that they have clarity in the project around product, purpose, and audience. So what am I creating? So in this case, some sort of an alternate version of a book report, but then the purpose and audience, and that why there. We want to tie that to the audience and think about why am I creating this and for whom, and hopefully in PBL it is an authentic audience, or it's authentic to the discipline, or perhaps to the student. And I do think that tech certainly has a wow factor and a draw in factor with kids. The sustainability in how you keep that going, because you look at all kinds of tech tools and say that's fun, but how long will it last? And thinking about that, are there specific strategies that you have tried to include in the work with Q and Wonder Workshop stuff that helps sort of keep that interest going, as opposed to the next shiny thing?
Yeah, I think so. We approach it in multiple ways. One thing is, if you look online now, we actually have 10 free lessons that tie to creative writing that pair with the robot. And if you look at those lessons, we don't just use the robot. Like you said, we actually use the design thinking process to help kids navigate through this project. And one of the key ones is actually, like you said, understanding your audience. And they actually talk about, how do you write for different audiences? And we go, you would write something differently for your grandmother than you would for your younger sibling. And it's actually a conversation piece there, so that it doesn't just boil down to, oh, my kids are my students or my learners are playing with robots. It's surrounded by content that gives context for the students and for you why they're using the robot. And the other point is that the reason why Dash has stayed relevant for 4 years plus, we just celebrated Dash's birthday about a month ago, and it's because we add more and more content, not only to our apps, but we've also added accessories that you can attach to the robot. And so one of the ones we just did this year was a sketch kit where you can actually attach an accessory to the robot, and now the learners can draw with the robot. So think about all of the different activities that now they can do by drawing with the robot. The types of, basically you can do activities in which math, right, geometry, art, and coding are all integrated into one activity itself. And we plan to continue to release more accessories. So we actually already have 2 accessories planned for Q next year, and also an accessory for Dash next year as well, to keep it relevant, like you said. Always the concern with technology, and I'm like that too. I'm not the earliest adopter of anything, to be honest. I was one of the last people to get an iPhone. And I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it was a big joke for all my friends. I hesitate because I go, how long is this technology going to last?
Right.
But we've seen the track record. I mean, we have teachers who got their first Dash robot during the Kickstarter program and are still using that robot right now. So, it's pretty fascinating. And what I would say the key is, and I know it's really hard, I'm a bit of a control freak myself, is to let the students or your learners run with the robot. And you take sort of and I know project-based learning is a lot like that. Take a step back. Don't be that helicopter teacher, because what the students are going to think of and create with this robot, it's going to surprise you. It's going to go beyond what you think they're capable of. And that's where the magic happens.
So what kind of things in the realm of technology integration do you think most, pulling from your experience with different companies and working with students as well, and all of that, what do most tech integration companies get wrong?
Yeah, sure. So I think that whole design thinking process that I just said, that we're teaching kids and learners, sometimes the product creators themselves forget to use that process. And they try to build something with all those bells and whistles because it's cool, right? And we work really closely with I sit right next to, actually right in between our software engineers and our hardware engineers. And they don't actually get to go to the classroom very much or work with kids very much. And we've had to push pretty hard to like encourage them to work with kids, because what happens is if you get separated from your audience for too long, you end up forgetting what the true basic needs are of your audience. And so what you end up seeing in the toy stores when it comes to kids and tech are things that are really flashy, things that are really, really colorful. But when you start playing with that technology, you realize that its only purpose was to be flashy. There wasn't any learning really baked into that product. And what happens is that's a flash in the pan toy, or that's a flash in the pan technology that a learner will just play with for an hour or two and then set it aside, right? So to me, that's like the biggest pitfall when you're creating a technology product for the classroom. For us, we do so much research as we're working on. I'm currently working on another product where I'm literally going to classrooms every week. I'm talking to teachers every month, getting a sense of what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes the thing that works isn't the flashiest thing in the world. It is something that is basic and fundamental to the needs of your user or to your audience. And sometimes it's not as exciting to work on, but that that's what those kids need. That's what those teachers need. And that's what basically makes you go in that direction. So the whole design thinking process, I really think, should be more widely adopted by people who are developing technology for education in the classroom.
Well, I find some real parallels there in terms of schools and professional development and teachers and what they do in their classroom. The idea that I think one of the problems that happens that I've seen happen, I've talked with folks, I've talked with Jamie Brooker from Kahoot and some other tech products, and the idea that there's always, if you gain any traction as a product, you have users who are emailing and calling in, or whatever the case may be, requesting this. Can you do this? Can you make it do this? And the idea that you just really want to please your audience, and schools do this as well. It's like, this is what teachers are saying, they want this, and they want this, really having some clarity around what it is that you do and you're trying to do, and sort of that mantra of keep it simple, stupid, because once you start getting too many sort of irons in the fire, balls in the air, whatever analogy we want to use,
correct,
then it becomes really problematic and watered down, and trying to meet too many audience needs at the same time just makes for doing lots of things either mediocre or poorly, and almost nothing really well. So the idea that schools are trying to do differentiation and growth mindset and technology integration and project-based learning and literacy, and not that they shouldn't be working on all of those things in some ways, but really, let's get a focus here. What is it that we're really trying to accomplish? And I see so many tech tools and products kind of lose their way insofar as that they just really don't have a focus. It's just sort of milquetoast.
Yeah, I completely agree. I basically, some people don't know this, but we have this email called teachers@makewonder.com that teachers use to write about anything under the sun. So it could be, I love your product too, I'm really frustrated about this piece, or I don't know how to do this. And I'm actually subscribed to that email list. I see every single email that comes through. And what happens is, like you said, if I try to answer every single person's complaint, you're right, the focus just completely dissipates. But the whole point of me being subscribed to that email is, over time, you begin to see trends. You begin to see a repeated question, a repeated need. And that's where my, spidey senses start acting up. And I'm going, hey, I just saw 10 different teachers from 10 very different schools asking for this feature. There's something there. And the same thing happens with what I said. I interview teachers all the time. That's the whole purpose of that too. I purposely try and interview teachers from very different regions, very different school settings. And if this large group of teachers, start saying the same thing over and over and over again, I know there's something there. So for middle school, the key ones that cropped up was that voice and choice piece, of that key differentiation between what you're dealing with elementary school students and what you're dealing with middle school students, is that middle school students want to feel that ownership of learning. Like I want to feel like I'm behind the driver's seat. And how do you make them feel that way and feel like they're getting authentic choice and authentic voice, but still providing that support and structure that they need, just like we talked about early on. So like I said, to bring focus is really taking the time talking to your user, because they're going to help you get that focus if you talk to enough of them.
So when we go in and do observation and give teachers feedback in our professional development settings, we like to talk with students, and for me, especially with project-based learning, you say, all right, let's go in and let's talk with the students. Certainly want to see what the teachers are doing and lots of other indicators. But one of the things that I like to do is talk with students, and I usually ask them, first of all, tell me what you're doing, and get them to give me some explanation of what they're doing. But then more importantly, I want to know why they're doing it, and to see if they can connect their work back to the driving question and the sort of the project goals that the teacher has laid out in the driving question. And that's a pretty clear indicator right off the get-go, just as a macro piece, that things are moving in the right direction. I don't know if you do that sort of process with students, or if you get into classrooms to be able to do that, but assuming you do, or if you were to, what kind of things would you be looking for or wanting to hear from a student to know this is working, and this is working well in the way that we wanted it to work?
Yeah, sure. So one of my favorite workshops that I like to teach, and this workshop has worked for kids from third grade all the way through college students, and I also think adults, is I call it the obstacle course design challenge for our robots. And the whole idea is, when I present this, I show them how to use the robot, obviously. And then I present them with this question. And I said, have you guys ever gone through an obstacle course and thought, this is not a fun obstacle course, or this doesn't make sense? And I challenge them to design an obstacle course with the knowledge that other people in this workshop will be running their obstacle course. So you have to think about clear once again, your user, your audience. How are you going to communicate where the start is, where the finish is, what the path is? And so what happens is, then I break them off into groups. They go and design and literally build an obstacle course. They have to run their robot through the obstacle course themselves. But as I circulate, my biggest question is, okay, so now think about someone who comes to your course without ever talking to you. How will they know where the start is? How will they know where the finish is? And how will they know where the path is? And they have to really think about that. And so then when you're asking them, why did you do that? They're like, well, I drew these arrows because I need the user to know which direction the robot should go, right? So you're thinking at this designer level now. And it's another way they basically understand. And we have a discussion afterwards about what we go through when we're designing products, right? The iteration that we have to go through so that the user is comfortable and knows exactly what they need to do. And the most exciting thing is when then I rotate the groups and they have to try out each other's obstacle courses. And afterwards we go to each obstacle course and people share their comments like, oh, this part was confusing, but this part was fun. And so once again, what we love to do is take the process that we ourselves do at work to make a good product and apply that process and have kids actually experience that themselves. And that's when you see, like you said, that why piece becomes very crystal clear by the end of that workshop.
Well, it's interesting. Certainly I talk about project-based learning a lot because that's the bulk of the work we do. And we do work in other areas, including Edtech and tech integration and that kind of thing. But we really want to see. I think it can be really helpful in project-based learning, but in all kinds of other areas. When you're designing a unit, designing a learning experience for students, for learners, to try to sort of walk through that at least mentally as though you were the learner and the student. And I feel like lots of teachers struggle to do that for some reason. It's like, I'm going to design this, I'm putting this together, but really, how do we, sort of architect that and design the work so that kind of the science of teaching, if you will, so that we know, at least to some reasonable degree of certainty or expectation, that this is kind of the way I think it's going to flow. But then, as anybody who has worked with students, and especially in an open-ended challenge like project-based learning or design thinking, knows that it sometimes doesn't go that way. So that's when that art of teaching comes in, where you can, because you've thought through it and you've designed it intentionally, you know the sort of flow and where you want to go, where you need to go, and those kinds of things, that you can flexibly and fluently do some shifts and ask the great questions and pull back and then push and those kinds of things. So I think that's an interesting point as you think about getting them to experience it and really design for the user, not for the teacher. And that's a big shift for lots of teachers.
Oh, I completely agree. It's very, I don't know what your classroom was like when you were going through school, right? But for me, it was a very, besides the one or, I had a couple inspiring teachers who broke the mold. But, when you think about a classroom, often most people think about teacher stands in front of the classroom and all the students are facing them, right? And it's hard to break away from that and think about your learners as the people who are controlling the learning, not just the teachers. Mm-hmm. Like it really, it's a really hard thing to think about, saying this is a collaborative effort. If you're the only one engaged, if you're the teacher and you're the only one engaged in the topic you're teaching, that's actually not learning.
Right.
Right. Your students have to be engaged and also be collaborating with you and also meeting you at least halfway to make that learning possible. And, when I talk about design thinking, I mean, I also believe teachers should adopt design thinking. Because one of the important stages in design thinking actually is sharing and refining your work. And that's key. When you're designing a lesson, and don't think of the lesson as a one end all be all, I'm just going to do it once, right? You're iterating on that lesson yourself,
right,
on that idea yourself. And so part of it is like when we design our activities, I share it with my teammates. I share it with the people in finance. I share it with people in engineering. They try to complete these activities themselves because I want to get their feedback, and everyone has a different perspective when they're trying to accomplish an activity or finish out a lesson or workshop. And you use that to refine your work. You keep iterating on that to get better. And what I like is, if you make it transparent to your learners that you're going through this process, like, hey, I have never done this before, but we're going to try it. And some things aren't going to work and some things are, but it's going to be like, part of this process is I need you to give me that feedback. I need you to help me get through this process. They feel way more engaged and part of that learning process, right? So, and you're basically modeling good learning. You're modeling, how am I going to learn from my mistakes, right? That whole growth mindset piece. Mm-hmm. If you, the teacher, are not willing to make mistakes in front of your students and learn from them, how are your students going to feel comfortable making mistakes and learning from them as well?
Yeah, I've been having this conversation with my 9-year-old, who is really starting to come into her own on some things in school, but also on a soccer field. And she loves soccer, but she's seeing herself as a leader and then struggling with making mistakes. And I told her the other day, I said, you're bound to do great things in your life, but only if you're willing to make mistakes, because if you're not, then you'll never try anything that will lead you to greatness. And that is something as a lesson for teachers. We try to get that work in our workshops, and most of the time, almost across the board, when we give opportunities to give and get feedback from peers on the work that they're doing, the teachers in our workshops love that. They sometimes have a hard time getting to that spot, so we have to really talk about some of the norms and some of the pieces that will help them get and give good feedback about the work, and not make it personal. So there's some structures that we include, but it's also just, kind of a mindset. The teachers, in a lot of cases, we joke that lots of teachers tend to want to have something that's sort of Pinterest worthy, right? Before they're ready to share it. And I think that that's a problem. Like, we want to be kind of having that mindset of constantly asking for feedback on our work. But sometimes, again, first of all, lots of schools don't allow for that as far as sort of structurally and logistically, and they don't have the pieces in place. But they also don't have the language and the norm. So are there some things that you do in your work and in your team that help you give and get good feedback on that work?
Yeah. There's so many avenues to address it. Sorry, I get really passionate about this because I think it's so important. When I grew up in a very competitive school environment where failure was really not an option. Mistakes are seen as a very negative thing. And I had to, through years, in my 20s, work through this practice of saying failure is okay. Mistakes actually great. Adam Savage from Mythbusters, I saw him speak at Maker Faire a couple years back, and he said failure is the vehicle on your pathway to success. And that's such a key piece right there. We actually have professional development courses online called Teach Wonder, and we actually cover this piece as well. And then in my curriculum guide that we wrote, I actually spent a good amount of time actually talking about this piece, the growth mindset, and saying, I've talked to teachers, and the ones who are the most successful integrating technology are the ones who embrace the fact that odds are my students are going to know more about this than I do. Odds are they're going to learn this more quickly than I do, and I'm okay with that. And I'm going to learn from them. And so what they do is I tell the teachers out there, when you're afraid of technology, scan your classroom. Those kids who are really, really fascinated about technology, make them your partners in crime. Okay, like make them your tech director of the classroom. And because that's going to really facilitate you, because that student is already eager to learn, eager to help, because this is something of their passion. Take advantage of that, and I think that's very key in that piece. So we talk a lot about that in our professional development. We talk a lot about that in our curriculum as well. But I also just, at conferences, just like you said, when you're doing a workshop, at conferences we do demos where there's this accessory you can add to Dash that lets you launch a ball. And we do this course called the Dashkeball Challenge. And you're just supposed to launch the ball to make a basket in a hoop. And I kid you not, maybe 25% of teachers are afraid to try first and see how it goes. They keep asking me, wait, how far should the robot move? Wait, how powerful should the launch be? And I go, you're not going to find out till you try. Right. They're like, but what if I make a mistake? And then I pause and what would you tell your students if they were doing this exact activity? Would you want them to be okay with making a mistake? And that's what shakes them out a little bit. Wait. Yeah, I've been teaching my students that it's okay to make mistakes, but I myself am now afraid to make that mistake. And it's like this light bulb moment that clicks, that goes, oh, I should be okay with this too. Right. And that's part of the learning, right there, is try out the activities yourself. Actually, a lot of teachers I talk to, sometimes they don't spend time playing with the robots themselves. And so how are you going to know what the struggles your students are going to go through unless you try and go through that same experience yourself, right? So there's a lot of different ways to start. It's a muscle, that growth mindset piece, to start really stretching and exercising the growth mindset muscle. takes some dedication, right? And takes some extra thought in how you're implementing your curriculum in the classroom.
So then, as far as getting feedback and giving feedback in your work, your office, your workplace, on your products and with your team, are there some things that you do intentionally to make that process more powerful or help your team with those things?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, that's the other half of the process too. Is when you talk about the Pinterest worthy thing, we are the opposite approach. So we adopt design thinking, like I said, and one of the other key components of design thinking process is you prototype as early as possible. So when I was working on a curriculum for Dash and for Q, my initial prototypes were just things I made in Microsoft Word. And it just had some prompts. I used clip art and I presented that to teachers and students to just get an idea of the flow of this activity. I didn't worry about making it pretty. That's the refined part. So when we were testing out robots and things like that, sometimes we're mashing pieces together and it's not the prettiest thing, but it's functional enough for us to present that in front of a kid or a teacher for them to understand the functionality and the capabilities we're thinking of building for this robot. And so that we can get that initial feedback as early as possible to sort of help us drive those decisions as we're refining our work, right? So if we waited until we had the perfect looking, most beautiful robot out in the world before presenting it to kids or our teachers, if they had some major feedback about some basic functionalities of it, it would be already too late. We would have had to work, redo a lot of work. So for us, it's the most efficient way to do it is to prototype early and show these really ugly prototypes, but to get that feedback as early as possible to drive our decision making.
So now I'm picturing your early prototypes as the smiling, blinking paperclip for Microsoft Word.
Pretty close. I'll share this blog with you, but I wrote a blog about the whole how we apply design thinking process to curriculum design here. And I have a photo, it's called The Evolution of Our Curriculum. And you actually see the paper prototypes that we start with. And it's just little laminated pieces of paper, basically. And you actually see it as we iterate through. Exactly. You can start with something like Clippy. Sometimes, we don't even have the voice of the robot ready. We don't have the audio recorded. So when we're doing testing, I literally have to have a heart to heart with the kids and say, okay, so this is a prototype. And we actually explain to the kids what a prototype is. And I go, I'm going to be the voice of the robot because it's not ready. You have to pretend when you hear my voice that that's the robot speaking. And they're totally cool with it.
Right.
They have imagination and creativity to sort of adapt to that. And we still get feedback. Or recently we're working on a product and I couldn't show a photo to the teachers of the product. So I literally had to show a blue dot, a blue circle. And I said, just pretend this blue circle is the product. And we're going to walk through some exercises. And every time you see the blue circle, it's our product. And they were like, all right, cool. And we got really valuable feedback from that. So think about it. I didn't have a photo of this product yet. And I was able to get some really insightful information from teachers and kids.
Are there any specific protocols or language that you use internally?
When it comes to testing?
Just feedback and being able to kind of go through that design thinking, that iteration, and get the feedback for revision. We like to use lots of protocols, sometimes thinking of, I like this, I wonder about that, things like that really help teachers and students put it, be a little bit more concrete in the protocols. You can only talk about what you like here, maybe what you wonder here, some questions here, the presenter can talk, then the feedback team can talk, and those kinds of things to help make sure that there are opportunities for the feedback that we're looking for. So anything like that?
Sure. A couple strategies that we've adopted is very similar to what you said. What did you like about this? One of the things is how would you improve this if you were the creator? So they basically having them put themselves in our shoes and say, okay, if I had the capability of adding anything to this robot, what would you do? And that really helps them take the driver's seat in where the direction of this product, and we get a lot of great information that way. With kids, especially with middle school, it was really tough in the beginning. Actually, I don't know if you've tried to interview some middle school students. They seem a little bit more reticent. I realize a big pivot from K5 to 6-8 is middle school students are more aware and self-conscious, and they're more peer pressure sensitive, right?
Yeah.
So we had to find different approaches to get their feedback. Actually, when I first did a test, we partnered with Girls Who Code because we're all about gender balance and gender inclusivity when we create our content, and we partnered with Girls Who Code to teach 3 workshops, and every workshop afterwards, I wanted to get their feedback. And they were so quiet that first time. I asked, like, does anyone have any questions or any feedback? Nothing, like crickets. And I went, I know you guys have things to say. So I found instead the next time I went an online platform where kids could anonymously log in, sort of like a Slack or some other forum. And then I said, okay, now I'm going to ask you a question and you type in your answers into this online forum. And the floodgates opened. They had no problem sharing their opinion, So sometimes it's just trying to find the right way of allowing them to share their ideas. Sometimes we've also learned, don't have too many adults to kid ratio in a testing session. So if you got 4 adults looking at a kid, they're going to be way more self-conscious than if it's like 1 adult looking at a kid, right? So like protocol like that. And then the thing with the teachers, a tricky thing is not asking necessarily what they would do with their robots, but first ask what they have done with robots and technology in their classroom. Because I'm like everybody else, I'm very aspirational about what I would do with something, right? But the reality is more what I have done in the past, because odds are that's what I'm going to do when I adopt a new technology.
Right.
So we, in the beginning, made the mistake of asking, like, okay, like, how much would you use this? How often would you use this product? And they were super ambitious, like, I'm going to use it every day, right? But now I don't ask that question ever. I ask, how often have you used technology and products in the classroom? And I get a more honest answer. Once a month, once a quarter, once a week, and that makes me scale back my expectations when we create a product then, right? So there's little tips and tricks where we've learned to sort of take them, like you said, get the most out of our user testing sessions and interviews, because that it all takes time. And then we document thoroughly every single session. So either if we're allowed, we'll record it. If not, we'll take very, very detailed notes. And now what we've done is we'll take those notes and create a new column. And right next to those notes, we'll say action items. So how are we going to respond to this observation? What's the action item that we're going to do to help make our product meet that need or to address that concern? So it doesn't just become these observations that get archived and looked at, we actually are moving forward with that feedback.
So one of the things some of the things that you said there remind me of one of our most recent blogs, which are kind of discusses some ideal traits of a project-based learning teacher. And I'm wondering if you have any sense of what kind of traits or characteristics of a teacher trying to integrate technology like you in the Wonder Workshop tools and or any other Edtech. Are there some things that you, maybe when you go to pilot or work with teachers or think, I guess maybe even more importantly from a design perspective, what kind of teacher is more likely to be successful using tools like this in their classroom?
Right. Oh, that's a tough question. Because when I design, you talked about meeting all the needs of a school or a teacher, and sometimes that makes you lose focus on your product. We really try and make our product adaptable to whatever the teacher's needs may be. It's like threading a needle, trying to make content that really works for people regardless of the environment. So we created like these challenge cards that are paired with Dash. And I've seen teachers basically hand the cards to the students and let them run with it. I've seen teachers assign a specific card to every kid and make them advance slowly through it. And basically, we want to create curriculum that helps any teacher adapt, from the reluctant teacher to the eager teacher. Now, what I've seen, the people who are the most, not necessarily successful, but who are the most excited about the results and who are sharing their work and really excited about it are like what I said, a teacher with growth mindset who is okay becoming a collaborator with their learners when they're using technology like this, and who is really just, willing to adapt to how, I loved integrating technology when I taught. And technology is going to go wrong sometimes. It's just guaranteed. Something's not going to work. And I would always call. I was like, technology is weird. And so at a certain point, even before I said it, if something broke down, my students would be like, Miss Charlotte, technology is weird, right? And I'm like, yeah. So being okay with running into hiccups and being able to adapt to that change, and so the beauty and excitement of a moving object in your classroom, such as a robot, is that it's very engaging, but things are going to happen that you didn't anticipate or expect. And so you got to be willing to adapt to that. And I would say that that's about it. Like we design our products so you don't really need to have that much of a coding background. You can start with your students from day one and learn with them. So it's just that other piece, right? The willingness to learn, the willingness to collaborate with your students, and that growth mindset piece. And we provide the rest for you, So like I said, just like with PBL, if you have that mindset, you could do anything.
Well, I think some interesting parallels too, as you think about it. I mean, this is going to sound negative, and I don't mean it this way, but sort of designing to the middle, kind of like teaching to the middle, but teaching to the middle is not what we're looking to do, but because we want to differentiate, we want to meet students where they are and learners where they are and move them forward as much as we can. But designing to the middle, and I think there's a difference there. So designing to the middle for students so that they can access the engaging learning, things that can empower them, that might be different in a different level for each student, just like it would be with each teacher, and then do as much as they possibly can with it. So that's a real design element that I think teachers can think about as sort of a parallel lesson. How are you designing, not teaching to the middle, but designing to the middle so that as many, if not all of the students can really latch on in some way. They may latch on in different ways, and take that and just really go with it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, we call it low floor, high ceiling. I don't know if you've used that phrase before.
No.
So low floor, high ceiling is you design content, whether it's for teachers or for basically any learner, right? You design content so there's a low floor, so you can have success at the most basic level, even if you're a beginner. But that activity has enough room to grow with extensions and bonuses and extra challenges so that someone who's extremely skilled is still challenged, So everyone can finish that base activity, but then the people who finish that quickly have additional challenges or additional extensions to that activity to stay engaged. And so for our curriculum for Q, for example, I go back to voice and choice again. Choice isn't just feeling like I can pick strawberry versus chocolate ice cream. I mean, yeah, that's a great choice. But choice is actually a very, very, very extremely important learning objective for students. The ability to make a decision about what learning style works best for me, like what level works best for me, is something that I'm still learning when I'm trying to take on a new subject matter. And so when we designed the activities, we made this design process notebook for students that they actually go through this notebook and they finish activities and they complete that creative writing project as they progress through the notebook. Every single time they hit an activity, we call it an activity menu. And we actually, every activity is like we sort of code it at a difficulty level. So the kids get to choose which activity they want to do first. So kids who need that low floor can pick a lower level activity to begin with, right? Kids who want a high ceiling can pick a higher level activity or a more challenging activity. And then if there's extra time, they can do another one. So we basically, within one activity menu, bake in lots of differentiated instruction and learning opportunities for the students. So, when I was testing with Girls Who Code, I had some groups who just spent the entire 30 minutes on one activity in the menu. I had some groups complete all 4 within 30 minutes. And both of them were satisfied and really happy with what they did, So that's what I mean by low floor, high ceiling. It's just like you can be successful at any level within obviously a band of experience. So that's what we really strive for when it comes to designing content for kids is, like you said, that differentiated learning. It's not necessarily designing for the middle, but designing for the capacity to start at something basic and quickly allow someone, if they're very quick at it, to expand to something more advanced and at their own pace.
So we've sort of danced around the curriculum, mentioning it here and there. I think it'd be a good time to kind of dive into that a little bit. What are some of the details of that curriculum? And the Q is specifically for middle school ages, correct? So let's kind of give a little bit more on that, if you would, before we run out of time.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about that briefly. I touched upon it a little bit, but basically what we designed for Q are 3 units of curriculum, each one with a different theme. So the first unit I already talked about was creative writing. Unit 2 is going to be game design, and that's coming out end of October. So creative writing is already out and available. And then the last one coming out in January is innovation. And within each of these units, we designed a design process notebook, like I said, and this notebook basically has activity menus for kids to go through with low floor, high ceiling. It has prompts and blank pages for them to plan out their work and also reflect on their work. And also basically projects that they could choose. So they can choose 1 of 3 projects to work on, and we break that project up into small phases so kids can take it chunk by chunk. And every notebook ends with them presenting their work in front of the classroom or in front of an audience of their choice. So you get that whole design thinking process through, and also integrating that PBL piece. Paired with that are online lessons that are free on our website. So if you go to education.makewonder.com, you can actually find these lessons now, and you can review it quickly to see if it's a good fit for you. But we basically create 10 lessons for every single unit that's free, that lets you get exposure and get some guidance into how to introduce these coding concepts and robot capabilities to your learners as well. So that's basically it. And it's integrated really well with our Q app. We have one that's for mobile for Chromebooks, code.makewonder.com/Q. And then also we're compatible with iOS and Android as well on tablets. And basically, if you have tablets or Chromebooks, it'll work for both platforms. So once again, it's that adaptability piece, right? We want to make sure it's adaptable to as many school environments as possible, because we know there differs from classroom to classroom, from school to school.
So is the best place, I guess, the best role, or maybe there isn't a best role, do you suggest teachers look into it, or sort of tech integration media specialists, or if the answer is both, which I'm going to guess is probably the case, is there a different sort of entry point that works better for them? Like, I'm the tech integration specialist or media center, where should I start?
I definitely just go to makewonder.com. You can navigate to the education section, and I think it works for either audience. I think the most, and I'm sure you've seen this, the most successful ways of implementing technology is to integrate, collaborate with both the teachers and the tech integration specialists, so they're both on board. So when we've piloted our curriculum, it really takes a village, right? So you've got the IT team, you've got the tech the tech director, and also some teachers, these valiant teachers who want to try it out. And they all work together, they meet up, and they talk about what the implementation plan could be. And we actually also have outreach representatives to help you walk through that implementation planning process. Like I said, if you have questions, teachers@makewonder.com. I get it. Most other people get it too. and you'll be contacted by our handy dandy customer service people to answer any questions you might have about purchasing or if this is a good fit for your school. So yeah, website or teachers@makewonder.com.
Okay, and any social media or any other links that you'd like to share?
Sure, I can. Why don't I share it with you? Basically, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Pinterest, we're across the board. But what I recommend is just going to our website, makewonder.com, and you can find all that information there.
Yeah, and I'll put those things in the show notes as I usually do. But if you are an iTunes or some other location listener, if you go to makewonder.com and go all the way down to the bottom, there's some fancy boxes with rounded corners as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, and who knows whatever's coming next down the social media pike. So
seriously,
I'm
losing track.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So her name is Charlotte Cheng. She's the curriculum product manager at Wonder Workshop. Charlotte, thank you so much for the time and the thinking. And again, my girls have enjoyed it, and I think we'll continue to enjoy it.
Awesome. Pleasure talking to you, Drew.
That'll do it for today's podcast episode. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to review us and share us on your network so we can grow our audience to better meet your needs. Also, don't forget to find us on our websites, TeachThought.com and WeGrowTeachers.com, as well as our various social media outlets.